Welcome to the Alabama Public Health Training Network. I'm William Kennedy, the Alabama Department of Public Health State Social Work Director, and thank you for joining us today for our program, The Impact of COVID-19 on Human Trafficking. If you have a question about anything being discussed today, please call or email during our broadcast. The phone number and email address are on the screen now and will reappear again later in the program. Also, the handouts and evaluations are available online. You will need to register for this program in order to access those materials. Continuing education credits have been approved for nurses and social workers for this program. In order to receive credit for this training, you must watch the entire program, then complete and return the sign-in sheet and evaluation. While content may continue to be relevant, continuing ed credits will only be awarded for 5 years, actually that's 2 years for nurses and social workers expiring on October 28th, 2023. If you are watching this program on demand and want to receive a social work CE certificate, you will need to complete this social work test and send it in, along with your sign-in sheet and evaluation. If you're watching this program live, there is no social work test required. For social workers, if you're watching this program live, it qualifies for classroom hours. If you're watching on demand, it is considered non-classroom hours. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our presenter today. Renee Carpenter, Social Service Director of Camille Place, is no stranger to public health, as she worked with public health for many, many years and retired about 4 years ago.
Right.
Welcome, Renee. I know you have a lot of important information to cover today, so let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you, Bill, and it's great to be back. I want to start off with an apology. Anyone who knows me knows that October is not a good month for my allergies. So if I have to pause and get a cough drop, you all will understand why. But we're going to try to trudge through this and make it. So our objectives today, by the end of the training, you should be able to list at least 2 types of human trafficking, be able to list 3 risk factors for becoming a victim of human trafficking, and also be able to list 3 ways that efforts to slow the spread of COVID-19 have placed vulnerable populations at an even greater risk for being trafficked. So let's start off with some definitions. So what is human trafficking? Well, human trafficking, to put it in a nutshell, is modern day slavery. It is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to benefit from the service of another human being. We all thought, slavery was eradicated around the world 200 years ago, nearly, but that's not true. The 2 most common types of human trafficking that we see here in the United States and across the world would be labor trafficking and sex trafficking. There's also other types of trafficking like child brides, that's considered a form of human trafficking, child soldiers. There's also organ trafficking, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is the illegal harvesting of human organs, kidneys, lungs, heart, and basically selling it on the black market. Now, we don't see that here in the United States. For us, what we see the most of would be labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So sex trafficking, of course, labor trafficking, that's going to be things like restaurant service, hospitality industry, domestic servitude like a nanny or a housekeeper, and also in the agricultural industry we see labor trafficking. Sex trafficking includes things like webcams, pornography, brothels, street prostitution, stripping, that sort of thing. But it is the use of force, fraud, or coercion. You have to remember that. That's what makes it trafficking. Now, for a minor, there is no force, fraud, or coercion necessary. You don't have to prove that. So, what are some of the myths that are associated with human trafficking? The first one, and we see this all of the time, is that people tend to think that human trafficking involves kidnapping. And it does, but very rarely. The movie Taken several years ago with Liam Neeson really gave a lot of attention to human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, and it showed the use of force because his daughter was kidnapped. But that is very rare. It does happen, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but for the most part, it involves coercion or alluring of a person into sex trafficking. And I'm going to be talking more about sex trafficking than about labor trafficking, because that's what we see the most of. Another myth is that it usually involves transporting across national borders. That's actually human smuggling. That's very different from human trafficking. Now, human smuggling often leads to human trafficking, but the two terms are not interchangeable. They are two different things. Another myth is that traffickers are strangers, and that's just not the case. In the case of kidnapping, yeah, it probably is. But most victims of sex trafficking know their trafficker. In fact, many of them are trafficked by a family member. It may be a parent, grandparent, an older sibling, an aunt or an uncle. We get a lot of calls at Camille Place involving what we call familial pimping, which is just a family member that is selling another family member. Another myth is that victims only come from low socioeconomic families. Being of low income does make one at greater risk, but it does not mean that only low socioeconomic families are trafficked. There are victims that come from all socioeconomic backgrounds. And another myth is that only females are trafficked. Females are trafficked more often when it comes to sex trafficking, but they're not the only victim. Men and boys are also sex trafficked. And in fact, about 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 boys are victims compared to girls, or men compared to women. Men do tend to be trafficked at a little higher rate when it comes to labor trafficking. But all victims are not female, even within the sex trafficking industry. So how prevalent is trafficking across the globe? We're going to take a broad look at it, and then we'll narrow it down. But at any given day or any given moment, right now, there are over 40 million people who are held in slavery somewhere in the world. You'll see estimates ranging from 20 million to 40 plus million. Trafficking is a very underreported crime, so we tend to go with that higher number a little more, but 40 million people, that's 10 times the population of Alabama. It's a huge number. 71% of those who are trafficked are women and girls. If you think about, I mentioned child brides, well, that would be females. And of course, sex trafficking is predominantly female. 25% of the victims are under the age of 18. And it goes all the way down to infants, sadly. Sex trafficking, or human trafficking in general, brings in about $150 billion annually around the world. 99 or 2/3 of that is from sex trafficking alone. Now, this is an industry, when I first got involved with this a few years ago, it was the third highest illegal crime in the world. It was third behind the illegal drug trade and the illegal weapons trade. It has now surpassed the illegal weapons trade. It is now the second leading illegal industry in the world, and it's the most rapidly growing. So one day soon it will overtake the illegal drug trade. Because if you think about it, you sell a weapon one time, you sell the drugs one time, but you can sell a person over and over and over. So that's one of the reasons why it is such a widespread industry. And it's also very low risk. It's low risk for the trafficker and very high reward. So, in fact, some estimates show that if a pimp has what they call a stable of about, on average, 6 women or girls, then those women or girls can bring in anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 a year per girl. And generally, on average, they have 4 to 6. So you can see where it's very, very lucrative for the trafficker. Okay, this is going to be a little bit harder to see, but this is a global map that shows on the left, where it has the blue background, it shows the country of citizenship for those who are trafficked. And you'll see, of course, the United States has a huge dot. Now, that dot, even though it looks like it's sitting over Oklahoma, that's not just representing Oklahoma. That's representing the entirety of the United States. Very high trafficking coming out of Central America and out of the Caribbean. Also out of Europe, West Africa, and the Asian countries. Now, if you look over on the right, where it has the gray background, those are where these victims are being trafficked to. So you'll see the dot over the United States is much larger, which indicates that there are a lot of folks coming into this country who are being trafficked.
And you talked about how it's being underreported.
Right.
And so there was an article this week on AL.com talking about how here in Alabama we had no prosecutions of human trafficking in 2020. And so the surrounding states all did have some prosecution. And there's some reasons. You're welcome to go look at the article. But I think part of the reason is it's the underreporting, and we just didn't see it. We missed opportunities here in Alabama last year, and probably even in this year. So
there's no doubt, and COVID has played a major role in that.
Sure.
So we'll get to that, some of those reasons farther on into this. Nationally, 83% of victims are U.S. citizens or foreign nationals. So most of the victims are actually from the United States, but not all of them. In 2018, and that was the latest statistics I could find, about 50,000 victims were trafficked into the United States, which means they were brought here specifically to be trafficked. Most of the countries of origin for the United States were primarily Mexico and the Philippines. And probably one of the saddest statistics that I found was that over half of the criminal trafficking cases were sex trafficking cases involving children only. No adults were involved. So that is a horrible, horrible problem. And it's one that's only getting worse. Now, this is what we call a heat map. You've probably seen this map before. It's not changed much over the years. If you'll look, you'll see that every state in the country has had reports of human trafficking. Every single state. Even out in the desert, if you look at Nevada, you will see, and it's going to be the cities. It's going to be Reno and Las Vegas. But you will see that there's a dot everywhere, or in every state. The bright red cases are the most predominant. That, of course, is along the eastern seaboard, down around Florida, along the Gulf Coast, and then up the West Coast. Trafficking circuits, where victims are actually taken from place to place to place, tends to run along the lines of interstate highways. So if you look at that, you will see big cities and interstate highways.
And of course, that's because it's easy to transport, easy
to get them in and out of a state and stay ahead of authorities.
And there's usually hotels along.
That's right, along exits.
Yeah.
And what they'll actually do is call ahead and schedule appointments. A victim may not stay in one place but just a few hours, and then she's moved on somewhere else. So by the time, even if somebody did call law enforcement, by the time they get there, she's already been moved. So it makes it very difficult, which also lends to the lack of prosecution. Sure. Victims don't tend to rat out their pimps. which is why it's a very lucrative job for them. They make a lot of money, but a very low risk of ever being prosecuted. So in Alabama, we do have trafficking cases reported in Alabama. In 2018, there were 256 contacts, that could be a phone call or a text, that came into the national hotline. That hotline is in Washington, D.C. It's with the Polaris Project. Polaris is named that because Polaris is a North Star. And the North Star is what led slaves into freedom during, from the South during the days of slavery. So that's how Polaris Project got their name. They took, in 2018, 48 of their calls came from victims and survivors. But look at what happened in 2019. Additional calls, but the number of calls coming from victims and survivors almost doubled. That's a huge change, which means that the word is getting out there. Victims can text and they can also call, and I'll give you that number at the end. So common venues that we see in Alabama, and this is true everywhere in the United States, it's not just in Alabama, but here we see venues such as hotels, especially in the housekeeping in hotels, restaurants. Migrant farming is another one that we see a lot. Salons, like nail salons, a lot of maybe massage parlors. Sporting events, and a lot of people don't realize this, but it's not just professional sports, it's college sports. There's been trafficking rings that have been busted in Tuscaloosa and Auburn during football season. There was a time when there were a lot of ads that would come out in those places right around football games. When it was a home game, you would see those ads showing up. Festivals like Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras along the Gulf Coast is huge. There's a lot of victims being trafficked along I-10 during that time. Carnivals. One of the biggest places for trafficking in Alabama is the Dothan Peanut Festival. And you're thinking, the Peanut Festival? Yeah, the Dothan Peanut Festival. Again, it's in close proximity to 2 other states, and it's near a major interstate. So it's very easy to get away. Very easy to get in and get out. You cross a state line. You can stay one step ahead of the law enforcement that way. And of course, storefront operations. I think it was just this week that in North Florida, there were 4, I believe, massage parlors that were shut down because they were actually brothels.
And we've had that happen here in Montgomery as well.
In Montgomery.
Yeah.
Common locations, of course, include Huntsville, Birmingham, Montgomery, Tuscaloosa, Auburn and Opelika, Mobile, and Dothan. And I failed to mention that another sporting event that is huge is the Talladega Races. Traffickers come in and will bring their stables, they'll bring their girls in and work that week. So it's huge, but it's also happening in small towns. Don't think for 1 minute that it's not happening in a small town near you, because it is. So what risk factors might lead someone to be trafficked? One of the highest risk factors is recent migration or relocation. And if you think about it, their support system is much lower at that point, especially if they don't speak English. If they speak a different language, then it's very difficult for them to access services, to get a job, to take care of themselves. So that's one risk factor. Being a homeless or a runaway youth. If you think about it, if you're 14 years old, you have no identification probably, no job skills, certainly. And a lot of these kids are involved in what we call survival sex, which means they are trading their bodies for food and shelter. Being LGBTQ is huge. We find a large population of LGBTQ, particularly males, who have been kicked out of their homes because of their sexual orientation. And we see them on the streets as well. Being involved with child welfare, this is not a slam on the foster care system at all, but a child who is involved in the foster care system has already experienced a family breakdown of some sort. So that puts them at a higher risk. Also, substance use, whether that's alcohol, illegal drugs, or prescription drugs. But it puts them at a higher risk. Many of them can't afford their addiction, so they trade their body for the drugs. Or, in the case of familial pimping, one of the parents or both parents can't afford their drug habit, and they'll tend to sell their children. Mental health concerns, depression, having some sort of phobia, being socially isolated, all of these can lend to a person being victimized. Being undocumented, that's a huge one. If someone is here and they're not here legally, there's always that risk of being deported, and traffickers will use that against their victims. Even if the person may have a green card, maybe they're here on a work visa, or they're here on a student visa, those documents can be swiped. Trafficker has been known to steal those documents, and the person can't prove they're here legally. And so that places them at a high risk.
Well, and even individuals that are legal citizens here in the United States, often they take their documents to prevent them from being able to run or be able to access other resources. And so their driver's license ID, like that, those are taken from them. And so they're unable to prove who they are or what they're,
or why they're here.
Right, right.
But that they are here legally, that they are a citizen. Poverty or economic need. If, let's just say, a parent can't pay the rent, we see this a lot. They will exchange their child for rent money. They will let their landlord spend a little time with the child. We see that all the time. A history of physical and or sexual abuse, which often leads to being a runaway, being involved in the foster care system. It can lead to substance abuse. So all of these are compounded.
And mental health issues.
And mental health issues as well. So all of this adds up to a person being much more vulnerable. Grooming techniques. We don't hear about grooming a whole lot. Not as much as well, maybe more now than we used to, but it's something that a lot of presentations don't show much of. But one of the ways that a child in particular is groomed, but it can also be an older person, is through forming relationships. The relationship may start off very benign, just a friendship, even a friendship with a parent, in order to get access to the child. Traffickers are very manipulative. They are very good at what they do. And if they would turn that into something good, then we would be a much better society. But forming relationships is where it starts. Buying gifts. Little gifts. It could be a candy bar to begin with. Or it could be something much more expensive. It could be jewelry. It could be nails. It could be getting their hair done. Buying new clothes, new shoes. But buying gifts. Something to create the idea that this child or this other person owes that trafficker something. The trafficker will spend money on them. Testing the boundaries. We see this a lot with our children and our preteens and early teenagers, they're testing their boundaries with their parents anyway. Traffickers will encourage that. Secret communications. We see traffickers may buy their victim or the person they're grooming, they may buy them a separate cell phone. They may set them up with a separate secret email account. But something that the parents or the guardians don't know about, some way to get in touch with that child or that young person. Another is sharing explicit sexual materials. This is a way of breaking down this person's normal barriers, especially with young people. The more pornography they see or that they watch, the more they tend to normalize it. And so we tend to see, it would start off with what some people would call soft porn, and then it would lead to much more explicit pornography. It's also a way of teaching the child what the trafficker wants them to do. But that's a way to get them much more comfortable with the idea. Then it may lead to touching, could be holding hands, it could be a kiss on the forehead, a kiss on the cheek. That then will lead to fondling outside of clothes, then underneath clothes. It progresses. And again, that's testing the boundaries, but it's also getting the child to be more comfortable with this type of behavior. And then that leads into intimidation and into threats. And it's very common for a trafficker to threaten the family of their victim. And we hear it all the time. I will kill your parents. I will kill your dog, or whatever. They may even, at some point, kill an animal in the presence of the child just to show them that they can do it. And in some of the more severe cases that we've heard of, the child will see that trafficker kill another person. And boy, that will make the child know for sure, yeah, this guy will do it. And he'll do it to me, or he'll do it to my family, somebody I love. That will make sure that a child will keep their mouth shut, and they'll do whatever the trafficker is asking them to do. So it's very, very common for them to use threats. I want to talk a little bit about how our society has gotten more accustomed to situations that may groom children. And I'm not knocking Hasbro. I'm not going to knock any of the toy companies or the cartoons. But over time, I remember as a child, which that was a long time ago now, but if you think about some of you that are my age or a little older, you'll remember that television shows would not show a married couple in the same bed. Lucy and Ricky on I Love Lucy had separate beds. They had twin beds. The Flintstones, Fred and Wilma, they had separate beds. They never showed them in the same bed. That's not true anymore. We're seeing cartoons that are very sexualized, a lot of cleavage being shown, a lot of very skimpy clothing is being shown. That's all a part of grooming. That's all a part of breaking down barriers. And it helps lead into a child feeling like this is normal. This is nothing wrong with this.
Well, and also when we were growing up, there was 3 channels on the TV, and so nowadays there's 300 plus channels on the TV, but that's not even close to what kids are watching. They're watching stuff on YouTube. They're watching stuff on the internet that doesn't have to go through the same rules as those on TV, on live TV. So it's just a totally different world as far as what our kids have access to,
right,
and what's available, and what looks like a cartoon and might be, safe, isn't appropriate, right, for children.
There's a lot of anime pornography that's out there. And all a child's got to do is hit a button saying that they're 18, whether they are or not, and they can watch any of this. And again, this breaks down the barriers. It makes them feel like this is normal, this is okay. And even pornography, child pornography, is available on a cell phone.
Well, and,
to
you
a
know, and
child.
I have friends that are in the education world, principals, teachers, and they say, listen, these kids have these in their hands every day at school, and they're walking around with pornography on their phones, available to them any time of day. And so it's a huge issue.
And it makes them much more vulnerable to being trafficked. And y'all, there's trafficking that's going on in high schools. This is not some illicit activity that's going on in a certain section, in a seedy section of town anymore. Pimps don't graduate high school and say, oh, I think I'll become a pimp now. No. Very often, they're pimping when they're in high school. They're pimping high school girls, middle school girls. Gang activity is a huge area. That's one of the ways gangs make their money. They sell drugs, they sell illegal weapons, and they sell people. So, again, children have access to a lot of things that will help break down their barriers and make them much more likely to fall for a pimp's actions. But we're also seeing it in toys, and that's what I wanted to focus on for you. This is a picture of the original Trolls World Tour Poppy doll. Now, this doll created an outrage last year. She's cute. Cute little doll. The packaging said that she has a button on her tummy, that if you touch that button, she would speak or sing or something about 10 phrases. There was absolutely nothing on that packaging that said there was a second button. And that second button, y'all, is between her legs. If you look on the right, you will see that button. Now, how this toy made it through creation, marketing, sales, through all it, this crossed a lot of desks. And nobody thought this was inappropriate. Nobody thought that maybe we shouldn't put a button there. And not only that, but the doll made sounds when you press that button. Now, Hasbro made the statement that this was just a button that would be engaged when the doll was in a seated position. Y'all, you would have to slam the doll down for that to happen. Now, I'm going to play a very short clip. This is from YouTube, and this will show you the sounds that this doll made. Now, she's been taken off the shelves. You cannot buy this doll now. But it'll show you the sounds that this doll makes when you press the button. So let's go to the video.
Down here, I figured a video was the best way. So I just touched her tummy and she's going to sing for a minute. But down here is a button right here on her privates. And if you push those, she makes these sounds. Boop. Oh. Like a gasping sound.
In what universe is that okay? Imagine that doll in the hands of a trafficker who is grooming, say, a 3-year-old child. Plays right into his hands. It is exactly what he may be looking for, to teach the child that, look, it's fun when somebody touches you in the genital area. Even Poppy enjoys that. This was a horrible, horrible situation, and it all blew up in August of 2020 when a petition with almost 500,000 signatures on it is what got this doll taken off the shelves. You can't even buy it on eBay. I know because I've tried. I wanted to buy it for teaching purposes. but you cannot buy this now. If you see this doll on the shelf now, it is the one that does not have what's being referred to as the genital button. So you don't have to worry about it, but if your child got one last year, you really may want to go check it out and make sure that it does not have that button. Now I've got, Amber is going to read the apology statement that came out from Hasbro about this. Amber?
Hasbro spokeswoman Julie Duffy told CNN a statement that this feature was designed to react when the doll was seated, but we recognize the placement of the sensor may be perceived as inappropriate. This was not intentional, and we are happy to provide consumers with a replacement Poppy doll of similar value through our consumer care team. We are in the process of removing the item for purchase, Duffy added.
Now, this was around August the 6th of last year. So if you happen to have one, or your child happens to have one of these, you can get it replaced. But it has been pulled off the shelves. So I do commend Hasbro for doing that. But pay attention to what your kids have. Toys are not all that they appear to be. Another example is the LOL dolls. And you may have heard about this controversy. I don't know. The first thing that I have a problem with these dolls is in order to, they come in a little ball, a little plastic ball, but the way that you open it is it has several layers of plastic, and there's a zipper, and you unzip it. And you have to unzip up to 5, I think, layers in order to get to the doll. That in itself is just a red flag for me, but maybe that's just me. But these dolls are cute. They're called surprise dolls. What we found out is that a few of them, certainly not all, and not even close to most of them, but there are a few of them that when they are dipped in either ice cold water or warm water, they're called color changers. You know that it is a color changer because it will have a picture on there of the doll, a plus sign, and a water drop. And that's how you know that it is a color changer. Not all of them are color changers. But a few of them, when you dip them in water, this is what shows up. That's lingerie on a doll that is designed to look like a toddler. If you look at, I mean, the one on the left is just absolutely hideous. They all are. The picture with the 3 dolls on it, the one with the doll that's blowing the bubble gum, she's wearing thigh-high boots and a fishnet bodysuit. The doll with the blue hair, if you look in her breast area, there's stars that look like pasties that a stripper would use. And the doll on the right has above-the-knee boots and garters. These are just a few of the LOL dolls are like this. But if your child has some of these, you may want to go dip them in cold water and then dip them in hot water and just see what happens. The color change, most of the time when the color change occurs, it's nothing. It may be a swimsuit that just changes color, or maybe flowers appear. It's something very, very appropriate, no problem. But there are a few, and these are some examples, that it's not appropriate. I have seen one that, and some of them also, if you put them in water, tattoos may show up. There's one that shows a pizza slice, and it's actually over, it's a female doll, and it's over her pubic area. So again, when you're thinking about gifts being given as far as grooming goes, this would be one that a trafficker may use. So again, I'm not blasting the MDA company that makes these dolls at all. I'm just saying be aware of what may be out there. Now also, LOL dolls also come in boy dolls. It's clearly labeled that it's a boy doll. And some of them are color changers as well. There's nothing on this box or in the packaging that would tell you that this is what that doll looks like. He's anatomically correct. There's nothing on there that says he's anatomically correct. I bought one just to see for myself, was this true? And it is. It's led to some pretty uncomfortable conversations between parents and their young daughters, for sure. The girls are not anatomically correct, so why are the boys? Just makes you wonder. So I know the title was about the impact of COVID-19, and we've spent most of this time not talking about COVID-19. But, so what has COVID-19 done for traffickers that's made their work a little easier? One thing is, of course, job loss. Many industries shut down. Parents were without money, and so we saw and we know that there was an increase in trafficking because of that. Children were also home alone. Many parents were in essential industries. Maybe they're in the medical field or law enforcement, EMS, fire, something like that. They had to go to work. Children couldn't go to school. And many daycares were closed down. So we had children that perhaps were being supervised by an older sibling who may be caught up watching pornography on their phone during that time. But children were spending time at home alone, which meant they had a lot more time to go into chat rooms, to get online and be victimized. Maybe they think they're talking to a 16-year-old across town when really it's a 50-year-old in another state. And it's very easy for children to give up a little too much information to make it easy to find them. Children were also spending more time online, of course. But the big one, and to go along with what you were saying, Bill, there was less contact with mandatory reporters. We know that reports of child abuse and neglect went way down last year. That's because schools were closed. Teachers are mandated reporters, but the kids weren't in class. Daycare workers, mandated reporters, but the children weren't in daycare. A lot of parents, myself included for my own health, didn't go to the doctor or the dentist for routine care because you didn't want to catch COVID. Doctor's visits, dental visits, those were used more for sick visits or injuries or something like that than for preventative care. So again, it led to less contact with mandatory reporters. Made it a lot easier for these kids to, who were being victimized, not to come face to face with somebody who was going to intervene on their behalf. Also, and I'm a huge proponent of face masks, but face masks help hide identity. So the use of face masks has helped traffickers also. And I want to give you an example of that. This is Michaela, not her real name. But if you were asked to describe Michaela, you could describe her outfit, that she has dark hair that is slightly below the shoulders. You could say she has dimples. You might say that she is missing both of her front teeth. Maybe she has a scar on her chin. There's a lot of things that you could describe about Michaela. But if we move over to Michael, who's wearing a mask, okay, he's a cute little boy. We can describe his outfit. We know he has dark hair, dark eyes. Does he have a scar on his upper lip? We don't know. Is he missing teeth? We don't know. Does he have a bruise on his face where he's been slapped? We don't know. Does he have tape over his mouth where he can't talk? We don't know. We can't see that. And we have been seeing cases where victims have had their mouths taped. You cover it with a mask, nobody knows. And they're walking right past us in airports or in restaurants, anywhere. But here's the other thing, and this has been going on for many, many years, and some of you may have already figured this out. This is actually the same child. This is Michaela, who is dressed to appear like a boy. Traffickers have been doing this for years. You take a little girl into a restroom in a busy place, bus stop, maybe an airport, change her clothes, throw a baseball cap on her, put her hair up where it can't be seen, and she walks out and people see a little boy. Because nobody thinks anything about a little boy coming out of a restroom with a woman. The mask has just made the trafficker's job easier. So we've got to pay more attention to what's happening. And again, I am not saying don't wear a mask. Please wear a mask. We've got to get this pandemic over with, the sooner the better, because our children are at risk. But it's very easy to change the identity of a child, especially if she were to walk in with a surgical mask, change her clothes real quick, throw a cowboy hat on her, and put on some kind of Avengers mask or something that looks very much like a little boy, and tell her, oh, we're playing hide and seek, and she walks out the door and disappears with someone else. Remember, most victims are trafficked by someone they know, and she thinks it's a game, and nobody knows that that child was just sold in the bathroom. So what do you do if you suspect that human trafficking is occurring? The biggest thing that I can tell you is do not approach the victim or the perpetrator. It is an extremely dangerous situation. You could get yourself hurt, but you could also get the victim hurt. So do not approach them. For heaven's sakes, do not purchase them. You've committed a crime at that point. Do call 911 or call law enforcement. Law enforcement has gotten a lot of training lately. They know how to handle these cases. Or you can also call the human trafficking hotline. This is the phone number I was talking about that goes to the Polaris Project. It's 888-3737-888. It's very easy to remember. And another thing that you can do is text the word SAFE or the word INFO to 233-733. That text will also go to the Polaris Project. But do we have any questions? That's all the material that I have. There's some resources on there if you want to see where I got the material from.
We don't have any questions yet, but you've mentioned you're from Camille Place, and I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about Camille Place.
Well, Camille Place is going to be a group home for victims who have been rescued out of sex trafficking, who are minors, between the ages of 6 and 19. And we are not yet open, but we are close. We're much closer than we've ever been. We've started the building process. We have a roof, and we have walls, and we have doors, and windows. So we're starting the interior at this point. So we hope to open in a few months.
Good.
And we can house up to 16 girls at one time. So follow us on Facebook. Shameless plug here. Camille Place. We are on Facebook and Instagram, and we also have a website. So if you're interested, please look us up and support us if you can.
Okay. We do have a question.
Okay.
So I was wondering, you talked a little bit about the common venues that the trafficking is taking place, and I was just curious to know if you had any more information about how the authorities discover these things going on in such big events, how they find out about it.
Most of the time that comes through the Fusion Center, which is going to be here in Montgomery. After 9/11, Fusion Centers were set up all across the country. And that was to help law enforcement, fire, EMS, FBI, to all coordinate their efforts. Because what we found is that they weren't working together. So that information will come into the Fusion Center. And a lot of times we've got staff at the Fusion Center who have alter egos, we'll call it. And they are online watching. They are, in fact, they followed, excuse me, just was a few years ago, they were able to follow one victim based on the phone number that was being offered up in ads, and she was trafficked in 3 states in 24 hours. And so they were able to see where she was going to be, and then they would follow up. They also, any calls that come in to the national hotline where it's suspected will go through the Fusion Center, and then it's disseminated out to that location. They also get a lot of tips in from truck drivers. Truck drivers have been the source of rescue for a lot of young girls in particular, because they tend to be the ones who are turned out to work truck stops. In fact, they're called lot lizards, is the nickname for them. And there's a group called Truckers Against Trafficking, TAT, and that's part of what they do. They will call it in every time. And because they're sitting there at these locations and they may be there overnight, they can watch, they can get tag numbers of vehicles. They may see a large SUV drive up and 4 or 5 girls get out and they start going door to door on the trucks. And so they'll call it in. But that's how they're able to follow and to know that it's these venues, because they're seeing the ads show up. Now, Backpage.com was a place that got a lot of ads, a lot of activity. It has been shut down. The FBI has been able to shut them down. But Craigslist, you know, if you've got a product to sell, and unfortunately that's what we're talking about, is human beings being a product, they're sold in all kinds of ads. So that's how they're able to track it.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions from the audience?
None have come
Okay.
in, so certainly appreciate you being here. And this is going to conclude our program for today. I want to thank Renee for being here, and thank you for watching. Please remember that you can refer back to the training and resources anytime on demand, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.